All right, guys. Today, what I wanted to do was a quick shading tutorial, specifically shading a sphere, right? So, like I know in class we've talked about shading a lot, right? We do a lot of shading practice. The value scale that I have drawn up here should look really familiar. I know we do practice shading some of these simple shapes often. Specifically, what I wanted to focus on today was the sphere, though, because that's really the hardest, one of the harder things uh, that we shade when we're doing these basic shapes. And the reason it's harder or more difficult is because you have these other shapes and they've got specific sides that have corners, and then it sort of cuts off the light, right? So if the light's coming from this direction, then we know the light is not hitting this whole side. So we know that whole side's going to be dark, right? And we know this side's going to be a little bit lighter. Same thing with the cube. We know this whole back side here is not going to be receiving any light, and so we know it's going to be darker. But the sphere is a rounded surface, right? So when you shade a rounded surface, it's a little bit more tricky because you have to start off really dark around here around the edge, and then you have to slowly and gradually and smoothly, transition up towards the light, right? So it's a little bit trickier, and that's the kind of thing that you're going to have to shade more often, a curved surface than you are, surfaces like these. And so the things we draw in class, the things you'll draw, are more often than not going to be more organic, rounded shapes, right? So I just wanted to do a quick tutorial on how to shade a sphere, because it's a really valuable thing and it's really good practice on going from dark to light. So, obviously when you're shading, you always want to know where your light source is, right? So if you're just making your drawing up out of your head, then you pick it, if you figure out where you want your light source to be. So I'm just going to say my light source is here. Here's my light source. Sun's coming from this direction, right? And so that's how I know what to shade, where, right? Now, if you notice, I talked about this being a gradual, smooth transition from light to dark. I wanted to show you what not to do because I think it's always valuable to see what not to do. So this is basically one of the most common things I see from students when we're practicing shading spheres, right? You do have a transition from light to dark, right? It's really dark over here. It's really light over here, but there's no like smooth gradual transition, right? Down here, it's really dark and then it slowly, smoothly gets lighter as it gets towards the light source, right? So, and then the same thing with the shadow. Right here, we have just a solid black shadow. Down here, we have a shadow that's really dark right up next to the object, and then as it gets farther and farther away from farther away from the object, the shadow gets lighter and lighter, right? So this is what I wanted to focus on today. So when you have your sphere, and this is the same thing, like any sort of curved surface, you would do the same type of shading, right? But a sphere is just a really good way to practice that. So first thing I'm going to do when I shade this sphere, is obviously identify my light source, and then if the light's come from this direction, I know that this edge, this back half of the sphere here, is what's going to be the darkest, right? So I'm just going to start off. I'm not pressing down very hard. I'm just going to start off going along that edge, just lightly sort of shading in where I know it's going to be darker. Okay? And notice, again, I'm not going really, really heavy. I'm not going really dark. I'm just kind of drawing myself a roadmap of where it's going to be, where the shading is going to be, right? So, and then basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow that edge, and I'm just going to go along that edge and I'm basically just going back and forth, and every time I go back and forth, I'm going to get a little bit darker, right? So notice how it's already starting to get darker. All right, now, one of the things that I like, or this is sort of how I like to think about this, this type of shading, is I'm sort of shading in layers, right? Because eventually this whole edge is going to be a lot darker, right? But right now I'm just kind of filling it in where I know it's going to be. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did along the edge. I'm just going to start doing that, going back and forth as I get towards the light, right? So I'm just going to go up like this, and I'm not going very heavy, right? I'm not pressing down real hard with my pencil. And then I'm coming back down, just kind of filling in that space, going back up, and coming back down. And notice every time I go up and down and up and down, it's getting a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter, right? So now, obviously, this is not dark enough. I'm just sort of filling it in where I know it's going to be. So now that I sort of have it filled in, I'm going to go back and I'm going to first do this darker edge. I'm going to make this edge darker. So again, I'm just going along that back edge where I know it's going to be dark. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're layering, especially when you're doing this back edge, notice that once it's starting to get darker, I'm starting to do these longer kind of passes around along the back edge, and I'm kind of following that same direction, right? That back edge is a kind of this big curve, and so I'm shading kind of in this big curve. Right? And so now that's starting to get darker. We can see it's not quite as dark down here. So I'm going to darken that up down here. Okay, so now I've kind of got this back edge kind of where I want it, kind of have the darkness that I want it, right? And so now I want to kind of focus on this middle area. So basically, we're focusing on this middle area. I'm going to go back and just keep doing what I was doing before. I'm just going to start up top. And notice I'm going light. I'm holding my pencil kind of at an angle. I'm not holding it like this. When you hold your pencil like this, you have a tendency to want to press down much harder. So I hold my pencil back here, kind of hold it at a more of a flatter angle, and that allows me a little bit more control over how hard I'm pressing down on my pencil. Okay, and so notice I'm not pressing down really hard. I'm just kind of going over it in layers, right? And every layer I go over, as I get towards the light, is going to get lighter and lighter. Okay. One thing when you're shading that a lot of people get confused about is people think that you have to press down really hard with your pencil in order to make it darker, right? And that is one way to make your shading darker, is to press down hard with your pencil. But what I like to do, rather than pressing down really hard, I like to layer my shading. I just kind of go over it and over it until it gets darker and darker. The more you go over the same area, the darker it's going to be, no matter how hard or light you're pressing down, right? So I'm just going back across. You can see I'm just going over and over. I'm going up and down and up and down, and every time I go up, every time I go down, it gets lighter and lighter. I'm pressing down lighter on my pencil. Like that. So now that's pretty good. It's still a little bit too light down here. There's kind of an area right here that's not really dark enough yet, so I'm going to go back over that a little bit. Okay. Now, one other way that you can make this look just a little bit smoother, right, a little bit more of a gradual transition, you can take either a piece of paper or paper towel. A lot of times I just use my finger, and I just do what we call blending, right? I take my finger and I just kind of blend my pencil marks together, right, so that you can't really see the individual marks from my pencil as much. It all just kind of smudges or blends together. Sometimes it's called smudging, sometimes it's called blending. Now you can see my lighter area kind of got a little smudged there. So then you just take your eraser, create your highlight a little bit with your eraser, blend it a little bit more. Okay. And that's one thing a lot of people don't realize, is that you can use an eraser. You can shade. I could shade all the way up, right? I could shade this whole thing, right? And I could blend that in there. And then I could go back in with my eraser, and I could create that highlight where the light's reflecting off of this object, right? So an eraser isn't just for fixing mistakes. An eraser is a tool for a lot of different things. So there's my highlight. So now the last thing you want to do, obviously you want to do a shadow. So if the light source comes from this direction, then you just follow the light source, and that's what direction the shadow is going to go. So we know the shadow is going to sort of go out this direction. So here's a shadow. All right, just draw the outline real quick. Now, one thing you always want to keep in mind, anytime you draw a shadow, the very darkest part of your whole drawing is going to be right where the shadow meets the object, right? When the shadow meets the object, that's where the least amount of light is going to be anywhere in your drawing. So that's going to be the darkest area. So I'm going to make that really dark. Just going to go over it several times. Right? And then as the shadow gets farther out, as the shadow moves away from the object, it's going to be receiving more light, right? More light's going to be hitting it, so it's going to get lighter and lighter. So it's still really dark here, but then as I start to move away from the object, from the sphere, it's going to get lighter and lighter. And so it should look something kind of like that. And then of course you can go over, you can see where, where I transitioned my values. You can go back over there to make those a little smoother. Like that. And then you can blend it a little bit. Draw a horizon line. And there you go, right? So again, when you're shading a curved surface like this, it's all about starting soft. Don't feel like you need to start out pressing really hard, right? That's what everybody's mistake, like I said, everybody's mistake is they want to take their pencil, they want to hold it like this, and they want to shade as dark as they can, right? But the key is to start off light, and then go back over it, and then go back over it again, and just slowly transition from dark to light. Just layer your shading. It takes a little bit of patience. It's not as fast as that, but it looks a lot better if you take your time and you just slowly transition, slowly layer your shading. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got something out of it. My next video, I think, is going to be, I'm going to start in on some facial features, eyes, nose, mouth, things like that. I'll probably do one on each, and then do one focusing on the shape of the face, and then probably do one on kind of putting it all together. Keep an eye out for that. And that's going to come in handy because in 8th grade, we do a self-portrait project where you have to take a picture of yourself on the iPad and then you have to draw a self-portrait. So those skills will definitely come in handy. All right, keep an eye out on the school Facebook page for next video. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, guys.